How they doing? No, strong.
I've never seen it that big. They've had small there's a man here that you can see from. I wasn't know that he passed over
How are we all doing? You ready to put your tray tables up and seat? JD, I'm trying. Seats in the upright position, your seatbelts locked. This is going to be a good ride today. Who enjoyed yesterday? I had a ball. Thank you, Carol, and all the ladies for dinner last night. That was absolutely fantastic as well. And just remind everybody, we do have lunch. We'll have some conversations over lunch, and then dinner tonight with Eric Mason, who's in the back. And that reminds me, please make sure you go to the back. Steve Smith joined us today, and I think somebody else has joined us today. And Paul Graham is back there. Just a bunch of folks back there. Spend some time back there. Spend some money. Help a small business. There we go. I've done my part. What's today? Okay, so today we're going to start off with Rick Wise, who I know none of you have met before. And he's one of my dearest friends over the last several years. And we worked together on the Francis Marion papers, and all things Francis Marion, and all things just life in general. So Rick is going to have us walk through the transition to partisan command. You ready, Rick?
Yep.
Let's do this. And afterwards,
Quick note.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, you gotta have it. On this day in 1781,
Cornwallis.
Cornwallis.
Lord over.
Yeah, but he didn't show up, that little.
No, but
Can we just say that? Did I say that out? I just said that out loud.
hip hip, huzzah! Hip hip, huzzah! Hip hip, huzzah!
Thank you, JD.
Somehow it doesn't sound the same without David Brewer.
No, he couldn't be here, unfortunately. He does give a good job. Yeah. But back to our normal batshit crazy from last night. Thank you, JD. Right, it's all yours.
Of course, Cornwallis would not have been in Yorktown if it wasn't the way we treated him here in South Carolina.
Amen.
There you go.
Okay, for those of you who were at the round table over at St. Matthew's a couple of months ago, hey, this is the same presentation. However, I was getting prodded along to kind of buzz right through it, so we're going to take a little bit more time with it today. Hopefully not more than 3.5 hours. Unfortunately, a couple of you folks flinched because you know I'm capable of doing that.
And it's harder to hit a moving target, Rick.
That is correct. That's why I like to wander about. Francis Marion came in and took command here in South Carolina of a partisan force in August 1780, and he did that after having served for a while as a conventional commander. So what I want to talk to you all about today is some of the influences Marion had to be able to have that transition, and not only the transition to partisan command, but to do it in such an effective manner. So you don't learn that overnight, but it seemed to be practically intuitive. So let's talk about some of those influences. Oh, that would be helpful. Francis Marion's military career didn't start until he was about 27 years old. That's when the Cherokee Wars were coming into being. He and his brother sign up, they go and they participate, and for the first parts of those operations, they didn't really do much as far as active combat, that sort of thing. But what Marion did do was he got training. So if you can imagine, you've got a guy who's been a part of the militia early on. And so when we think about the Revolutionary War and we talk about all these raw farmers and merchants going out and grabbing a musket and going to battle, it wasn't exactly like that. because they had been part of militias for a long time, because the militias were critical for self-defense, particularly in the back country, when you had Native American problems and that sort of thing. So Marion understood a little bit about military training. He understood because he had been a part of that process. And then he goes, and you have the Cherokee War, and Marion gets some outstanding training. During this period of time, he is being trained by folks who are regular British officers. He understands now how the British military operates, what the standards are that they're trying to achieve. He's also, because he became a light infantry commander, he is getting outstanding training from these guys that were Rogers Rangers. So that type tactic, that type operation, he is now becoming very well versed in. Okay, and he also learned some of the things that were to pay off later on very well. In the regular military, there was a very strong discipline. And there was also that cultural difference between the aristocratic officer class and those below them. And Marion was learning that firsthand. Now, this was a combined operation that had not only regular forces, but also militia forces. And so Marion started to notice a decided difference between how militia reacted to all this. These guys don't just kowtow to these officers. You know, they kind of portray kind of how the American spirit is to the American soldier. Having been an officer for 23 and a half years, I will tell you, most soldiers will do whatever you want them to, but they got to know why you're doing it. Now, if you train them properly, you get them to the point where, you know, you give a command and they execute it, and it's kind of important that you do that in combat. But the thing is that Marion was learning the differences. And he was seeing that if the militia didn't like what was going on, they voted with their feet and got out of there. So Marion learned that you had to treat those folks differently. Because when you get down to it, most of these guys are not getting paid anything. Most of these guys showed up with their own weapons and their own equipment on their back. And these guys are just looking for leadership. But that leadership primarily is going to come from their own officers. So that makes a difference in how you look at how things are doing. So he learned that there had to be a different approach to how you dealt with militia versus those guys who were regulars. Okay. Then he also learned about that irregular warfare, fighting against the Cherokee, the effectiveness of the long rifle. I'm here to tell you, even today, standoff range is a very important thing. If you can hit him and he can't hit you, good stuff. But be able to achieve and acquire that type of effectiveness, one of the things you had to do was you had to have the right tactical concept, using cover and concealment, ambush, being able to fake your enemy out so that you drew them into a place where they were at a disadvantage. So Marion is learning all these lessons on the fly. Okay? One of the things he also found out was that reprisals were a never-ending cycle. If you burn that guy's house, he's going to burn somebody else's house. If you steal this from somebody, somebody's going to steal something from you. And it never ends. So Marion learned that how you treat people is important, particularly in a combat environment. And by doing that, he is starting to develop the persona, the character for the type partisan commander that he was going to become. 1775, shot heard around the world. We have that letter that comes in telling everybody about what took place at Lexington and Concord. Shortly thereafter, the South Carolina Provincial Congress decides they're going to form several regiments. Marion is one of the men, he's in the legislature, and he is one of those that is elected to be one of the captains of those regiments. If I remember correctly, there were 25 elected. I think Marion tied for second as far as the number of votes to be a captain. So he was already recognized for his military knowledge and expertise. That being the case, he is now being put into a position where he can be effective. He starts off as a captain. He's a company commander in the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. He teams back up with a guy that he had been with in the Cherokee Wars. And the guy that he signs up with, that he's going to be with, is Colonel William Moultrie. So he joins up with Moultrie, and he is sent over to Fort Dorchester. He is over there for a while, and he's learning this command thing. As a matter of fact, when you get back to a battle called Black Mingo, after Black Mingo, Marion was going to go after a location that was over here at Salem Church. So there was another loyalist location there. It just happens to be that loyalist group was being commanded by a former lieutenant of Marion's. As a matter of fact, in one of his letters in his orderly book, he posted that he gave, after they were leaving Dorchester, he wrote that I pass my regards for the solid duty by all the officers and men of the regiment, with the exception of this particular lieutenant. That may have been when that lieutenant went over and became a loyalist. Okay, but he's learning command. By 1776, Marion has played a significant hand in the building of that palmetto log fort there at Fort Sullivan. Not only has he played a significant role in that, he is also the guy who was commanding the left wing of the fort during the battle. But one of the things that Marion does is he's the disciplinarian in the regiment. Moultrie is kind of an easygoing guy. So Marion is a guy who is really carrying a lot of the weight as far as enforcing things. But he did not only help work with the construction of the fort, another thing that he did was taking care of the troops. For instance, one of his orders were that the oak trees not be cut down. And the reason the oak trees would not be cut down was to provide shade for the troops in the hot summer heat there in Charleston. So at the Battle of Fort Moultrie, Marion's doing all the things you would expect him to do. They're very effective, and of course they win the day. As a result of that victory, several things happen. Moultrie is promoted to Brigadier General. Several other promotions take place. And by November 1776, Marion is now Lieutenant Colonel Commandant of the 2nd South Carolina Regiment. He is in command. Well, wait a minute. Regiments are commanded by colonels. Why is he not a colonel? Well, during that time, it was discovered that the British Army does not have their regiments commanded by a colonel. It's by a lieutenant colonel. And so if you go to exchange prisoners, it's not an even exchange, so it's not working out well. So Continental Congress decided what they would do is they would have a Lieutenant Colonel Commandant rank. Technically, it was a full colonel, and the next promotion should be Brigadier General. Over the course of events, you will see that Marion did not get a regular commission as a Brigadier General because at the end of the war, they changed the rules again, and they left him as a Lieutenant Colonel. So when final promotions came through, he was only a Colonel and not a Brigadier General. Okay, fair, as I told my kids, fair is a social event usually held in the fall of the year. Okay, the 1779, Marion is at Charleston when General Prevost marches from Savannah and gets to the gates of Charleston. That's because General Lincoln is with most of his army at Augusta. How many here knew that Charleston was under siege in 1779? Okay, and for the rest of you, let me fill in the blank spaces here. General Prevost marched to the gates of Charleston and demanded that Charleston surrender, or else he would go in and sack the city. Governor Rutledge was nervous in the service, and he did not think that there were enough troops under Colonel Moultrie to be able to defend the city. Moultrie did the estimated numbers and said, yeah, we can do this. Rutledge did the numbers and said, no, we can't. So he said, I want you to go and see what the terms of surrender will be. Moultrie said, I'm not going to do that. So after going and selecting several folks, hey, finally somebody decided they would take the surrender request over to Prevost. Prevost basically said, hey, all of you have to surrender. Everybody's going to be prisoners of war, pretty much including the government officials. Well, that didn't go over so well, okay? But they went back again and said, well, let's sweeten the pot. So Governor Rutledge said, if you do this, or if we do this, what if South Carolina will be neutral for the rest of the war? And being neutral, whatever happens at the end of the war, then we will go with whichever side wins. And that will leave the port open and that sort of thing. You realize we were with one decision away from South Carolina not playing the significant role that we did in the Revolutionary War? However, General Prevost said, hey, that's a political decision, not a military decision. I demand that you surrender by the terms that we had already established. At which point, the surrender offer was withdrawn. And they spent a sleepless night waiting for the British to attack the next morning. The sun came up and the British were gone. They had heard that Lincoln was marching from Augusta. They were about to get caught between two forces, and they withdrew. Francis Marion was a part of that defense of the city. And he was that close to being a prisoner of war. So, Marion is learning all sorts of things as a regular officer. To include at the siege of Charleston in 1780, Marion commands his troops at Spring Hill Redoubt. In 1779, in Savannah, 2nd South Carolina got handled roughly. He learns from that. He comes back and he's at Sheldon Church. He's kind of the first line of defense of the British leave out of Savannah and start going towards Charleston. At Sheldon Church, one of the things that he does is he grows a mustache, along with all of his men. As a matter of fact, he writes a letter that talks about his, he's got some pretty neat mustachios, he calls them. Okay, and thanks to Karen McNutt, we are probably going to have a picture of a mustachioed Francis Marion to go with the Francis Marion papers. Okay, so that'll be pretty good. Okay, but Marion is is being depended on by General Lincoln and General Moultrie for what he is doing. During that time, there's a reorganization of the regiments. The 2nd Regiment is one of those regiments that is maintained. And I think it had a lot to do with the way Marion ran and trained that regiment. You know, training is an important part of things. And Marion trained his people. He trained his leaders. He trained his men to be able to execute their mission. If we look at the fact that he commanded part of the defenses there at Fort Sullivan. Well, before Fort Sullivan, when they're at Hadrian's Point, Marion has got one of his orders where he is ordering all his officers to report for artillery training being conducted by officers of the 4th Regiment so that they understand how to operate the artillery pieces and how to be able to command the troops that are doing it. Okay, so not everybody that was manning cannon at Fort Sullivan was an artilleryman. There were infantry who had been converted to artillerymen, and Marion ensured that that training took place. So you're seeing the development of Marion, and all this is development of a guy who was training to be a conventional officer. Conventional tactics, linear tactics, shoulder to shoulder, volley fire. All those things that you would expect from a regular line unit in the Revolutionary War. He understands artillery and the uses of artillery. He understands the use of mounted troops for scouting, for mobility. Marion understands engineering because he is helping build Fort Sullivan. So he's learning all these various military components that is making him a very well-rounded officer. But again, his focus is on regular, conventional operations because that's what he's involved with. Okay? Siege of Charleston. After Savannah, British kind of, instead of trying to come in through the harbor, they come in through the good Gulf country over around Seabrook Island, Kiowa, over that area, and take a land approach rather than a sea approach. Marion is a part of the defenses at the Siege of Charleston, and then fate intervenes. Once again, for whatever reason, Marion is not in Charleston when it falls to the British. You know, he jumped out of a window supposedly at a party, trying to get away from it. There was alcohol, there was women, and there was all that stuff, and Marion didn't want to be there, and so he escapes. And when he escapes, I think it was 106 Trad Street, I believe it is. I stood at that house at 106 Trad Street. I've been a paratrooper. I would not want to jump from that second story window, okay, or from the balcony. But either way, hey, Marion did, breaks his ankle, and it was probably the most fortunate broken ankles in history, because he is now not an officer in command. He's a supernumerary officer, meaning he's an extra guy with no real mission. So Lincoln sends all those people who didn't have a real mission out. He sends them away, and Marion's one of those guys. He goes home, he tries to recuperate, the city falls, and the next thing you know, they're after any former Continental officer or any Continental officer who's out in the countryside. As a matter of fact, I believe Hughie and Marion may have been the senior officers left that were not captured at Charleston. So Marion will be a very important find. Oh, by the way, a little side note here. When Bannister Tarleton goes up to the Waxhaws, one of the things he does, he stops at the home of a guy who resigned his commission in 1778. Had not been in the war in 2 years. He decides it's a good idea to burn this guy's house. This guy gets his uniform, his sword, and he goes up in the new acquisition around Rock Hill. And when he gets up there, he reforms the guys that had been part of the troops he had been recruiting when he was a regimental commander. And that guy was Thomas Sumter. Sumter was not in the war at all until Bannister Tarleton encouraged him to return. Okay, talk about shooting yourself in the foot. Okay, however, now Marion is going to make his way into North Carolina. Most accounts say that there's a summons or a letter that's been sent saying, hey, all former Continentals or whatever, make your way to North Carolina and join the Army. Whatever the case, Marion with a small group does that. So sometime in early July, Marion arrives. And if you'll read that letter there, or actually that account, Otho Holland Williams, Deputy Adjutant for the Continental Army at Hillsborough. Say again? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so Otho Holland Williams writes his account, and he talks about the folks that are with Marion. I think they named a band after this group later on. It's called Motley Crue. But those black hats, those helmets of the 2nd South Carolina are still prevalent. You know, I would say that if you had this group showed up, hey, some black, some white, some young, some old, you know, the only good thing about them is they were mounted. You know, if you look at that, it's like, wow, really? And they laughed at him. And the general sent him away of his own accord. You know how many, how many of you think, folks think this was General Gates that sent him away? Good, because it was General DeKalb who sent him away. And so you look at that and you say, DeKalb didn't appreciate Marion? DeKalb greatly appreciated Marion. And that's going to be one of the influences on Marion's transition to partisan command. General DeKalb was an outstanding officer in every regard. He was a German who had fought for the French for years. DeKalb came to America as a spy early on. He wanted to see, the French wanted to see if there was a way that they could kind of wrest America away from British control. And DeKalb went back and said, nah, you're not going to get these guys to give up the crown. They're just not going to do that. You can't, said they might talk bad about the government, but they don't want you to talk bad about the government. So DeKalb then later on came to America with a guy named the Marquis de Lafayette. They landed in Georgetown, went up to Charleston, made their way to Philadelphia, and the rest is history. By this time, and in the North, DeKalb had been given command of the Maryland Division, 1st and 2nd Maryland Brigades, and the Delaware Regiment. So he had some of the most veteran troops in America at the time under his command. They had been marching to the relief of Charleston. They get as far as Hillsborough, North Carolina. They found out that Charleston has fallen. Continental Congress says, well, we can't have DeKalb in command of the entire Southern Department. So they assigned General Horatio Gates to take command. You all remember Gates, the hero of Saratoga. Probably a couple of heroes at Saratoga, neither one of them being Gates. But the thing is Gates is not at command at the time that Marion arrives. Well, what is Williams talking away that he sent Marion away of his own accord? A letter that, and this is in the Marion papers, a letter that General DeKalb sent to General Richard Caswell, commanding the North Carolina militia, clearly states that he has dispatched Marion to Coles Bridge in search of forage and intelligence, and that he would be good to acquaint himself with Colonel Marion. So he has sent Marion out on a mission to do reconnaissance and to forage. Why was he doing that? Because Marion's men were mounted. Okay? When we get to this, one of the things, yes?
Just a quick note, Rick. Not only were they mounted, but they were not wanted in Hillsborough. The Continental Army was too big at that time. In and around Hillsborough was tiny, and they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough forage, so they said, go find us a location where we can keep all these men. They went to the Deep River area, which is in Randolph County and corner of Chatham County in North Carolina. And so that was what they were up to, was finding a new location and getting them the heck out of Hillsborough.
Thank you, J.D.
Sorry.
Hey, no, that's more information. Okay, so there was a use for Marion. We also need to think about where the camp came from. Okay, we all know that Parson Weems' the book on Marion, you got to treat it with kid gloves. If you read that book, you've got to be able to figure out where the Peter Oree stuff is and where the romanticization that's coming from Weems is. If you see something where Marion is waxing eloquent about Lady Liberty is my mistress, no, that's not Marion. Okay, if you see something that is straight, simple, kind of a direct thing, I'll give a little bit more credence that that is Ori talking and it didn't get romanticized. Part of that is talking about going to Hillsborough. Ori got there before Marion did. Ori has been kind of designated as a supernumerary aid to DeKalb. So when Marion gets there, Ori introduces them. They have dinner together. And when they have dinner together, there are all kinds of discussions. One account is DeKalb talking about going and visiting home the last time. Okay, and you would think, well, okay, you know, maybe that was romanticized until it actually showed up, and that same story showed up in other documents. So it seemed to be a story that DeKalb had told several times about his father being up in years and chopping wood, and you know that he was still in good health and all that sort of thing. Okay, but in these conversations, DeKalb probably told them about his past experiences. DeKalb had gone up through the Army. He had held many different positions, and one of his first positions was he was with the Partisan Brigade. And I think that he had a decided influence on Marion by talking to him about the effectiveness of partisans operating in the rear area of your enemy. That they're mounted, they're mobile, you fight dismounted, you get intelligence, you do all the things that a partisan does, and then you are able to have, with a few people, a major impact. Because you're siphoning off troops that could be carrying muskets in battle. Those troops are now guarding convoys. Those troops are now having to, you've got to reinforce your couriers as they're going forward because you're trying to cut off communications with the enemy. So you are now having an impact that the enemy has to rethink how they're doing things. Every convoy that leaves Georgetown or Charleston to go towards Camden, instead of having 20 men securing it, you now have to have a company. And sometimes even more than that, trying to secure this convoy. Why? Because of partisan activity. So Marion is learning these lessons from the master. He's learning this, I believe, from DeKalb. Now later on, Gates comes in and takes command. And when Gates takes command, one of the things he doesn't need is cavalry. Gates has operated in the north. They have not really had too much of an affinity for cavalry operations up in that area. So therefore, he doesn't really favor mounted folks. But the strange thing is, when he takes command, he asked Marion to be a part of his entourage. Why would he show any favor towards Marion? I think it's because of one of his aides. One of course, the aides that were with DeKalb kind of transferred over to Gates. Gates is trying to figure out who was who, and who were these guys? One of his aides was Thomas Pinckney, future governor of South Carolina, wounded very severely at the Battle of Camden. Later on, about 1822 or whatever, Thomas Pinckney writes a letter in response to the book on Greene, and when he does that, he is trying to make some clarifying comments. And one of the comments in that book was that Gates did not have an appreciation for Marion. Thomas Pinckney says that he thinks that there was an appreciation, a very much an appreciation for Marion's character, that Gates understood the actions that Marion had been involved in, and so therefore he did have an appreciation for him, but we just don't think that he had any good use for Marion at the time. They get to the Battle of Camden. Okay, when they come right before the Battle of Camden, a letter has come in from the Williamsburg militia. That would be Major John James and Company, and they are looking for a commander. They wanted a continental commander with experience. Gates looks around, scratches his head, and says, I wonder who that could be. He's got somebody right there, someone who's familiar with the area, someone who understands what he's getting into. He sends Marion. So on the 15th of August, the day before the Battle of Camden, Marion mounts up with his 20 men, and they head towards what is now Johnsonville, South Carolina, Witherspoon's Ferry. And when he gets there, he is going to be a man who is going to take command, and he has no authority to do so. He is going to go and he's going to take command of an organization that he is, as of yet, fairly unfamiliar with, though he may know some of the people who were there, and some of them may know him. And it's going to be kind of force of personality that maybe helps make this thing happen initially. What Ori says, you know, they got the order to go down the country, and actually it was a dual mission. A letter had always also been sent out to General Harrington, telling him to take command of the militia in the northeastern portions of North Carolina. And then the guidance was given to Marion, take command of the folks in the PD area pretty much. But the bigger issue was, hey, you're going to take command, and then you were going to go to the Santee River, and you're going to burn the boats on the Santee River to be able to prevent Lord Cornwallis from being able to escape once we defeat him here. That's the plan. So Marion leaves on a mission. That night, they're sleeping at actually a loyalist person's house. She's kind of nervous in the service, so they're all sleeping on the porch or whatever, and they hear the first shots of the Battle of Camden. Hearing that, they don't know exactly what's going on, so they mount up and make their way toward Johnsonville. The best we can tell, they arrive somewhere about the 17th of August, the day after the battle, and Marion goes in. Okay, and we're going to have to put ourselves in the shoes of some young militiamen there and think about what their impression was of Francis Marion as he and his entourage, if you will, pull into Witherspoon's Ferry. We don't know exactly how many were there. We'll say that there were probably a couple of hundred. I think you had maybe Hugh Oree and some other folks. I'm not sure if Colonel Giles was there or not. But you had folks that had been told that a new commander is coming. And so they are gathered there at the landing. What is the Veterans Landing now? And this is what William Noble James, at about 15 years old, who was there, said of his first impression. Now, the only thing I will tell you is that everything I have seen is that the 2nd South Carolina had liberty on the crescents on their helmets and not liberty or death. I think that was the 3rd South Carolina had that. However, this is an impression. Marion, all of about 5'2" of him, you know, 110 pounds or so, you know, little guy. Okay? He is coming in here and he's going to take command of these troops that sorely need to be led and led well. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine looking at this guy? Okay, Thomas Sumter is the high school quarterback. I'm not sure they would have considered Marion to be the mascot or not. You know, but the thing is it's not, you know, you got to think of the force of personality he must have had. I did a staff ride where I took Special Forces troops there. And we were, one of their concerns, they're actually in a mission transition right now, as they're looking at maybe going back into that, you know, partisan warfare, guerrilla warfare type aspect for their operations. And one of their questions was, how did Francis Marion take command of his troops? What was the influence he had to be able to encourage them, to be able to bring them in? And I will tell you folks, I cannot imagine what it must have been like for them to look at this guy sitting on that horse and figure out if this guy is going to be their leader or not. And think about this, Marion was a Continental officer. These guys are militia. You do not have any authority in that capacity to command these men. The only way you command them is if they allow you to command them. And I think it probably went something like this. Gentlemen, I have been sent to be your commander. You are militia. I am a Continental officer. I do not have the authority to command you except if you accept that. You are led by outstanding officers, and those officers will still stay in your command. One of the things I know is that you are sorely pressed at home. That every time you come in and you conduct operations with us, that you will leave your homes alone. Well, gentlemen, what I am going to do is I'm going to help you solve that problem. But I need you here to be able to do it. Come when you can. Go home when you need to. I know that you have farms, I know you have families, but we also have to protect everyone from the ravages of the British Army. What we will do is together we will eliminate the threats to your homes. Together we will eliminate those hostile activities from your loyalist brethren, because we are going to make it where they see that liberty is the way for us to be able to meld our whole communities back together again. It is not going to be easy. I cannot bring you ammunition, I cannot bring you food, I cannot bring you horses. What we need, we will go out and acquire on our own. We will strike convoys and we will take what we need. We will disrupt the enemy. We may be but a few, but we're not holding ground. We're going to ambush, hit and run, and we will make an impact with our few. Now, I will lead you, but I will tell you this. You will follow the orders of your officers. You will follow my orders, and if you don't, by God, you will pay the price, because we will be a disciplined army. We will not be a rabble. I have orders to burn the boats on the Santee. We're about to get about our business, gentlemen. So you can make your decision quickly, because with or without you, I am marching against our enemy. That is all. Officers to me. Now, if it went down like that or not, I don't know. But for whatever reason, those men followed Francis Marion. They accepted his command. One of the things that led them more and more to his command was the fact that he was successful. Shortly after that, they burned the boats on the Santee. I believe the Orees had to tell their uncle they were burning his boat too. He was not a happy camper. They go to Great Savannah, and they are able to free prisoners that were marching to Charleston. Okay, this motley crew did not impress them either, because hey, many of them went on into to be imprisoned in Charleston. You know, kind of hard to fathom, but they did. Shortly thereafter, Marion wins at Blue Savannah. He is on the British radar. He is called Colonel Marion, M-E-R-I-O-N. okay, that Colonel Marion seems to have, raised his head over there. A guy named Major James Weems is sent after Marion. After Blue Savannah, Marion's going over towards King Street. He has sent out patrols. Major John James tells them, hey, these guys are coming in force. They're about 400. Marion then learns that the loyalists that he has defeated at Blue Savannah have reformed and they're coming in. He also has forces that are coming in from Georgetown that are marching against him. He's about to get caught on 3 sides. Okay, at this time, he had 53 men at Blue Savannah. He had 60 more had joined him by the time he got through with that because of success. He now has to go and march up into North Carolina. Okay, he is learning a partisan tactic. That partisan tactic is when you are threatened in force, you disperse. You can't stand and fight. You're not there to hold terrain. What you're there for is to protect your force. So he moves up into North Carolina. He goes through the gap that's not covered yet, and he's gone. He leaves a small force back to try to take care of the people there. Weems comes in, and he burns a swath from King Street to Sherall, 15 miles wide, 70 miles long. Okay, so this whole thing with Sherman is Weems 2.0. Okay, so the thing is then Marion comes back. As soon as the enemy is dissipated again, he comes back. He wins at Black Mingo. Again, victory brings people in. He wins at Terracotta Swamp. So he is doing great things. Well, how is he able to do it? Okay, his leadership by example. Okay, when they are going into camp, these folks are being trained. They're not just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. He is teaching them how to do what they need to do. Marion is a disciplinarian. If you are a militiaman and you get out of line, you are being punished as well. Okay, all you have to do is read his orderly book. And oh, by the way, in the Marion papers, we have taken the letters and covered them with the orderly book as well. If Marion writes a letter today, you can find it. I talked about yesterday that he received a letter from Sumter and said, I'll be at the headwaters of the Black River on this date. You can follow his orderly book, and he's exactly where he said he would be when he said he would be there. Okay, so they're training people. They're doing what they need to do. Okay, so that's part of the action. Look, hey, very early on, 24 actions between the time he took command in January 1781. Marion wrote, I believe, 6 letters to Gates during that time. I think he got 2 back and dispersed months apart. Marion is operating, he is sending very effective letters reporting his actions. And he's getting nothing in return. He's not getting ammunition, he's not getting food, he's not getting horses, he's not getting any assistance from outside his own area. Why is that? Because if you look at it, when right after the Battle of Camden, Thomas Sumter got defeated at Fishing Creek and his unit is dispersed at the time, Marion is the only show in town in South Carolina. That's the only effective opposition. And so here we go. He is being neglected by entire headquarters. Okay? So there were 2 times that happened. But Marion continued to march. He practiced what he was preaching, hit and run tactics. Hit them where they least expect you to be. Yesterday I talked a little bit about, that partisan warfare is like smoke. You don't know where it's going to go. You don't know where it's coming from. All you know it's there. So Marion kept the enemy off balance. They had to be concerned about every convoy that left the gates of Georgetown. Well, how do you gather intelligence and all this stuff? One account is that one of Marion's best spies, someone once asked him, how do you do that? And the thing was, this guy had only one trusted agent. And what he would do was, there was a swamp outside of Georgetown that you could actually see into the town. He would go and tie his horse up in the swamp, and there was like a cypress tree, and he would go up that tree and stay up there all day. And as soon as the convoy left, he would come down, hit his horse, and Marion usually within a few hours had that information that the convoy had left and this is where they're headed towards. Okay? So amazing stuff. Hey, it's simple but effective. He used the terrain. He used those swamps. Now, I don't think Marion has been slept in the swamp all the time. They used the houses and stuff around, but the idea was that they used those swamps for cover and concealment. Okay? We also got to realize the terrain at that time was not like we see it today. There's a whole bunch of undergrowth and stuff today that we didn't have back then. So it was, you're able to negotiate yourself through the forest a little bit better than you would today. Nighttime. If you look at Marion's operations and when they were conducted, if you go to the lunar tables from the Naval Observatory, you will find that Marion struck many times on moonless nights, or where there was very low illumination, okay, out of the darkness. Okay, maybe Batman took it from him, I don't know. But the thing is that, that adds again to that psychological warfare thing. Can you ever really relax? Because even one of the ladies that was being escorted out of Georgetown by a couple of British officers, they were afraid of Marion and his men, that those foxes sneaking in the night, I believe is the way they put it. Okay? Dispersion. As we said, hey, if the enemy builds up too much, you're smoke. You go away. That's what you do. As a matter of fact, during the Rounds campaign, when Sumter was asking Marion, hey, you need to do this, Marion said he needed to get his troops back. That's because Rawdon and Watson had been after Marion and his group. He had to disperse at that time because of that. That's why he had to pull his troops back together. Even though historians not understanding some of that stuff have said that Marion dispersed his troops so he would not have to serve under Sumter's command. That's not true. He dispersed his troops because that's what good partisans do when they're threatened. Okay, what are the disadvantages of regular warfare? Filling the ranks. Marion's frustration was you never had enough men, and even if you did, you didn't know how long they were going to be there. So therefore, you couldn't plan an operation. Because if you planned an operation, you didn't know if you're going to have the 400 guys you got today. And so it made it very difficult to do that. There were the home factors. I alluded to yesterday in the movie The Patriot, where the guy goes home and his wife and son have been killed. Okay? It happened all the time. That you didn't know what you were going to find when you got back home. So that made it a very daunting task to pick up your rifle or musket and leave your family at home to conduct operations. But if you had the chance of success, and another thing that Marion did, Marion was very, very considerate of his men's lives. He did not just willy-nilly go in there. His operations were well conducted and well planned. And you had a major chance of success, and you always had a way of getting out. Okay, so Marion had a great way of doing that. Logistics and support came from the people. Steve Smith was back there. He can tell you all about the Snows Island area, not just Snows Island itself, and the fact that the people there supported the partisan operation and the insurgency. Okay, we talked about yesterday that somebody had compared Marion's operations, and those same things were used by Mao Zedong and used by the Viet Cong and all that. They weren't, because they were effective. When I was in Iraq, we were talking about the insurgency in Iraq, and there was a task force put together where they were talking about counterinsurgency warfare or whatever, and they wanted to study all these different things. I'm like, why don't you study Francis Marion? Well, what did he do? I'm like, these folks that you're talking about used his tactics to do this. And deserters. Marion kept everything close to his vest. If they were riding out, he didn't tell them where they were going or when they were leaving or when they were coming back. Because everybody that came into his camp could just as easily leave, and you didn't know who was a deserter going over to the loyalists to tell them where you were going. Marion kept things so close to the vest that one account was that these guys, when they had first been called in by Marion, they're sitting around the campfire at night or whatever, and they're talking and enjoying the life as militia guys can do. And all of a sudden, Marion comes out of his tent and says, "Mount up!" And says, "We were gone 2 days. We marched without water, we marched without food, we only had like 3 rounds of ammunition apiece, and we went and conducted an ambush and came back." Soldiers learned. They said the next time that they got called into camp, that they kept an eye over Marion's cook, and as soon as they saw him get busy, they got busy. Okay, so that's how things work. Okay, so Marion, they attacked the supply lines and they disrupted loyalist opposition. Their actions at Blue Savannah, Black Mango, Terracotta Swamp, those are type actions that kept the loyalist opposition off balance, and it made it where they realized that they were going up against a force to be reckoned with. Many of them switched sides and went with Marion because they saw that he was being effective. This is Marion's operational area. If you look at it, he's pretty well ringed in there by red forces. All those guys are in the cauldron. And if they leave home to go with Marion, they're leaving home and they don't know what they'll find when they come back. Ladies and gentlemen, what I wanted to do was give y'all a little idea of the influences on Marion's rise to partisan command. He went from being an outstanding conventional commander to being an outstanding partisan commander. And somewhere right around March 1781, because of the training that he had given to his men, there started to be another transition. Those raw militia who now had learned partisan operations started to learn more conventional operations. During the Bridges campaign, one of the reasons that Watson attacked Marion and Lord Rawdon wanted to have a little double envelopment to try to catch Marion, because Marion had always, when pushed by a force, had crossed the Black River, gone into the PD area, and disappeared into the swamps around Snow's Island. So the idea was that Watson was going to push him back on Doyle, who was going to go over to Snow's Island. What happened at this time, Marion didn't recross the Black River. Marion stood and fought. He delayed at Waibu Swamp. He delayed at Mount Hope Swamp. He stopped the British from going crossing the Black River at Lower Bridge. He harassed the British until he pursued a classic pursuit operation and drove them back into Georgetown. He changed tactics. After that, he went to 2 siege operations at Fort Watson and Fort Mott with Light Horse Harry Lee. And that led up to other operations to include the final big one, Utah Springs, where Francis Marion commanded the entire militia line, which was the first line in an attack at Utah Springs. Conventional tactics with Marion's men, particularly on the right flank, along with Light Horse Harry Lee, going up to 63rd and 64th regiments, fighting regular troops and driving them back. Marion's influences for partisan command couldn't hide the fact that he could have a well-versed force that would be effective wherever they go. Thank you for your time.
Does anybody have any questions for Rick?
Hey Rick, it's not a question, but I couldn't help but think when I saw Marion mounted on that gorgeous thoroughbred, that actually when they stopped, the men saw him, he was on a marsh tactic, which was just a little raggedy, taggedy horse, just like he was, you know, so he wasn't on this gorgeous thoroughbred, as the picture said, so it kind of added to his ambiance, you know. And also, I always thought that he learned his guerrilla tactics from the Indians.
Well,
Yeah, he picked up on a
Rocket Rangers.
yeah, well, he actually learned them fighting against the Cherokee. Okay, so but the same thing. He very effectively saw what they did. They used those long rifles for standoff range. They used terrain out into outstanding effect to try to channelize you into an ambush area.
Yeah, I think they learned from those Rangers that you might be hearing about later on tonight.
Hey, Rick.
Go preamp.
More Rangers than Partisan in Indian.
More of the Rangers.
I like that.
This is me here, Rick. This thing about Marion jumping out of the second floor, it's always struck me as fishy. And the reason is, here you have commanders, people of power, people of control, and they lock them in. That makes no sense to me. You go knock on the door and say, let me out. So I've often wondered why that story really developed. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I will tell you from my time in the Army, sometimes you had times when there was mandatory entertainment. And that mandatory entertainment sometimes meant that you would be at the party, and that was a thing during that time, that they would have what were called lock-in parties, where they locked the door and everybody stayed there until they were pretty well trashed. Okay, if we look at our military today, alcohol is more considerably frowned upon than any other time in history. If you go back to the armies of that time, if you didn't have rum or other spirits stashed away in your office, you were probably not doing yourself a good service. Okay, so did that happen? Not sure. We don't know if that's actually true or not. We do know that Marion got a broken ankle. There was probably nothing else in the line. If it had been something in the line of duty, I think somebody would have said it was in the line of duty. Marion himself would have probably said, hey, I kicked the cannon wheel and this is what happened. But there's something to the story, I think.
And you will have a good time.
Yes, you will have a good time. Yeah, mandatory fun.
Yeah. Rick, with the proliferation of insurgency and counterinsurgency operations, even into the future of warfare, has Special Forces, U.S. Army, and Marine Corps, do they look to study Francis Marion more than they had in the past?
At least the Special Forces folks that I was working with, yes. We took them to Dunham's Bluff. We showed them across the way where Snow's Island was. We talked about the aspects of Marion taking command. And the general I was talking to seemed to be taken aback by the fact that, Marion didn't come in with a couple of cases of gold or something to be able to influence these men to take command. And seriously, he could give them absolutely nothing. But they followed him. So that leads me to believe he had an unbelievably effective leadership persona.
Command presence.
Command presence.
And I think you gotta remember too that, Rommel studied, Pat studied Rommel. They both studied Mosby, and Mosby studied Francis Marion. So, I know my husband's a Cav Scout, and he said that they kind of traced it back, and now they're really just looking at Francis Marion.
And if you look at insurgency warfare, folks, didn't we just fight for 20 years against folks who were conducting insurgency warfare? It is effective. You can't, if you look at the German army in World War II, you could wrap your arms around them and fight them. Okay? It was those rear area operations where those folks are coming in and hitting you and you don't know where it's going to be and they hit and run. You go in and taking care of the aftermath. It's not like you're preventing it, and it's not like you're retaliating afterwards until, days or weeks later.
A couple of notes for addendum to add to what you had, which was wonderful. Thank you very much. The beginning of the war, the federal government, which wasn't very federal, and then the state government, which wasn't much, they decided that Continentals could lead militia. And they had a pecking order that they outlined and they codified that a lieutenant colonel in the Continentals could lead a colonel in the militia. So they had it was always one rank lower in Continental than what was in militia. So he did have the authority to command. Now, that at some point, I don't know whether that got changed, but I know it was there in the very beginning. The second note is that in December 31st of 1780, he was given commission as a brigadier general by Rutledge, Governor Rutledge, and it was effective January 1st. So he was then authorized to command militia throughout the whole state. Now, he did keep his lieutenant colonel commission in the Continentals, and he got very ticked because at some point in time he lost it. And I don't know whether they issued him a second one or whether he refound it, but for a long time he had lost his written commission. He was madder than a wet 7 hens. So let everybody have a few little extra notes there.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Yeah, the whole thing of who commands who and rank and all that played a big part. You know, Marion was upset because Sumter was made the brigadier general of militia, and he had resigned his commission. So now Sumter, who had resigned his commission, is now commanding Marion, who did not. Okay, so that was kind of a part of that thing. But the other thing is, if you look at the influences of Sumter and General Greene, there were plenty of times where Sumter was let's say, less than agreeable in doing things that Greene wanted to. I believe he may have cited the fact that he was militia and didn't have to follow orders. That was kind of a part of it too.
Two comments. Having been a JAG officer for 28 years in the National Guard, having been a JAG officer that's a lawyer in the National Guard for 28 years, that problem of command still exists. A federal officer cannot command a state National Guardsman unless the National Guardsman is federalized. And a state officer cannot command a federal troop unless the state officer has been federalized. So, state troops, federal troops, they can be nice to each other, and they should be nice to each other, but there's no command authority back and forth. And that actually took place with problems throughout the Revolution, where a federal commander would want to do some operation, and a state troops would say, well, we don't think so, and they go their own way. So that was a big problem. I think right down the line was a problem. The other thing, and that continued until just before World War I, where they started giving state officers dual commissions. So I was federally recognized, so I was a federal officer, but I also had a state commission. And Marion was one of the very first people who had that dual commission, so he could command either. Arthur Williams' statement about Marion's troops, people always quote that. They don't quote the rest of the statement by Williams, which was in his memoirs, which was attached to Greene's biography by Johnson, and that is, he said, I'm not saying this to run General Marion down, I'm saying it to show how somebody with a strong mind and a good heart can with very modest means achieve great things. And then he, a little later on, said, of General Marion, nothing bad should ever be said. So I think that Williams appreciated Marion.
And I will tell you that, okay, once upon a time in my military career, I was advising the Army National Guard up in Greer, South Carolina, or GER, as they call it. And you know, it was a pretty good assignment. We took the 218th Brigade to the National Training Center, and then we fielded the Paladin artillery system. So a very well spent 2 years. However, during that time, a hurricane was coming in, and all the preparations were being done. Being a native South Carolinian, I told them I wanted to deploy with them to help with the operations that they were going to be doing for hurricane relief. However, I was not allowed to do that. I offered to take leave to be able to do it, but it was the whole Posse Comitatus Act that said that it didn't matter, that even if I told somebody to stop at a barrier where water was rushing, that was illegal because I was a federal officer and I would be commanding state troops and civilian personnel.
Have you ever come across any information that Francis Marion was proficient in celestial navigation?
I have not run into that, but obviously he was very good at navigation. And part of it, I believe, was knowing the terrain. Part of it is you can navigate at night. Hey, that whole North Star thing, it works. I know in my military career, I could navigate by stars and moon, and it wasn't anything fancy. It was, hey, where do I need to be, and where is it right now, and where is it when I get there? You know, so yeah, you can do those sorts of things. But as far as sextant and compass and all that stuff, not that I know of.
Didn't you do that in land nav? You got day land nav and night land nav.
Yeah, but that's basically so you know how to use your compass at night.
Oh, that's good.
Okay.
Got it.
However, in the field artillery, we can use Polaris and Cochav and actually lay a battery using the stars, or you can use the sun in daytime. All you got to have is a master station. That's some of that fun artillery stuff.
Going back to having the different officers and getting the different offices, would it have anything to do politically with the fact that he was a Huguenot and Sumter was very close with all of the higher ranking officers, English and Francis Marion, Huguenot, and there was a little contention there, always had been, between French and English in the settlement before the Revolution. I didn't know if that might have any bearing whatsoever.
Harriet, though, it could have had a bearing. I haven't seen anything where that was highlighted. Marion seems to have gotten along very well with about anybody he was in contact with. He was not an outspoken guy.
Not so much Leon, but the other people.
Yeah, and, you know, and Sumter was kind of a gregarious guy. I think that, yeah, he was glad-handing people and all that sort of stuff. So kind of a study in contrast, if you will, two different ways of doing business.
I wonder if it was that in bearing politically. I mean,
One last question.
I don't know.
Rick,
Wait.
what's your assessment of the relationship between Lighthorse Harry Lee and Marion?
Okay, so the question is, what's the assessment of the relationship between Lighthorse Harry Lee and Marion?
Don't forget, we're going to talk about that in just a minute.
Okay. It was a relationship that was very good. It soured a little bit over time. And Lighthorse Harry Lee, in my opinion, he was a guy that wanted to be more influential than his rank. However, for instance, when he came in and Lighthorse Harry Lee joined Marion, a letter came in saying that Green was sending Lighthorse Harry Lee, and Marion's response was that that's fine, but I am, and the messenger, he sent to take the message back that I am commanding based on my lieutenant colonel rank as a continental officer and a senior rank to Lieutenant Colonel Lee, and that I will be in command. Okay, Lee didn't particularly like that, but I guess he kind of acquiesced. They worked effectively together. Somewhere around Fort Watson, it started to be a little bit off-key, and again, at that time, Lee had actually was practically chastising Green for not sending them artillery. As Green said, hey, I got other things going on. You know, but the thing is, Lee could be a pain. As a matter of fact, after Utah Springs, he went up to Virginia, and I forget if it was his own request or Green's request, but there needed to be a little bit of separation there.
We had one last question in the back. Did you have a question? No? Good? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Rick.
Will these people make their way to the front? For just a few minutes. Chris rolled up, and JD and Bill, Eric, can you come on up? And Elwood, you get the camera set up. I want to give a big thank you to all of you for coming. For participating for sharing. We've found so many special friends who have helped in so many ways that I can't express all of it. From printing the books for the attendees, for running the snack bar, those folks have done a great job, don't you think? And assisting with all the food and hauling stuff back and forth, bills, making the trips. Bringing indigo trees, we'll talk about indigo trees in a little bit. There's so many ways to keep this going. Thank you all. Georgia started recognizing very extra special people as the History Ambassador of the Year. And Chris and Bob were our first ones. Come on up, Chris.
JD, come on up.
JD. And in their honor of these people, we make donations to the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust, and now the South Carolina American Revolution Trust. And it's in honor of Bob and Chris, and Charles Baxley and David Brewer, JD, Bill Seegers, Dr. Owens, and Dr. Nyson, and this year in honor of Doug Bostic and Rick Wise. Thanks again for everybody, for all the help. We couldn't do it without you.
Hey, y'all look this way. Real quick.
You have to get in, Elwood.
I'll brush it in. I'll do so. Good, okay, we're good.
Thank you.